Yeah, my dream is to be in the middle of nowhere and never go outside and have someone bring me candy. Right. So I was like, what's the problem?
You'd have it covered. Yeah.
Welcome to Feminist Frequency Radio. This is episode number 3. I'm your host, Anita Sarkeesian, and I'm joined by Carolyn Pettit.
Hello.
And Ebony Astor.
Hey, people.
This is the show that asks you to be critical of the media you love. Or alternatively, we are the feminist killjoys coming for your media, depending on your perspective. On today's show, we're going to do a quick check-in with the pop culture news of the week. We're going to talk about comedian Hari Kondabolu's thought-provoking new documentary about Apu from The Simpsons. We're going to dive a little bit into Stranger Things 2 and discuss this pattern of murder dads that's shown up lately in media like Logan and The Last of Us. And we're going to end with What's Your Deal, where we'll each share something we've been thinking about lately. I still hate that name, so at me for some better ideas. Thank you.
At me if you just want to confirm that is the best title.
We will also be sharing a bonus segment for our fantastic Drip backers, in which we each recommend something we've watched and loved on Netflix recently. If you are a Drip backer already, thank you so much. We're overwhelmed with your enthusiasm and support for our new project. This podcast is entirely listener-supported on Kickstarter's new monthly crowdfunding subscription service, Drip. So if you like what you hear, please consider chipping in. You can do that at d.rip/femfreak. All right, y'all. I kind of feel like we've already done this.
Explain what you mean, Anita. I'm confused.
It's like a little bit of deja vu, as if we already recorded and now we're recording again. Weird.
Here's the thing, people. We don't like to tell you how the sausage is made, but we got to tell you how the sausage is made. I'm the worst. No,
tech is always difficult.
I completely effed up the recording for the initial hot takes. So we are re-recording. And here's hoping that I manage to A, stay awake, B, bless you with some more of my patented 8 a.m. charm.
I love it. And the more tired you are, Ebony, the more perfect your jokes are.
Well, here's what it is that they make even less sense at this time of day. But people are afraid to call me on it because they're like, maybe I just don't get it. So it works.
Yes, that's fair. All right, Carol, you want to check us in on the pop culture of the week?
Yeah, let's start with something a little more serious, and then we'll move to something a little more, uplifting. So on Thanksgiving, Uma Thurman put up a message on Instagram, and I don't know if Ebony and Anita, you had the chance to see it, but
Girl,
a few weeks prior, she appeared in this interview, and it was just amazing to watch, where she was asked on, I believe it was like the red carpet premiere for something or other, but she was asked about the scandals in Hollywood and everything, and you could just see in her face the anger and the effort she was making to hold things in, and she said that she's learned that it's not good to speak out in anger, and so she was going to take some time and then she would have something to say, and so it's that interview is incredible to watch. And so then on Thanksgiving she posted on her Instagram this message. It said, "Happy Thanksgiving. I'm grateful today to be alive, for all those I love and for all those who have the courage to stand up for others. I said I was angry recently, and I have a few reasons. Hashtag me too, in case you couldn't tell by the look on my face. I feel it's important to take your time, be fair, be exact. So happy Thanksgiving, everyone, except you, Harvey, and all of your wicked conspirators. I'm glad it's going slowly. You don't deserve a bullet. Stay tuned, Uma Thurman."
Wow.
So, yeah.
And it was a still from Kill Bill. Like, the picture she posted with the caption was a still from Kill Bill. Uma Thurman is coming for some necks, and I am here for it. She, the interview that Carol referenced, where she was just, visibly vibrating with rage. We knew, Uma has some shit to say, and she's like, let me gather this together because I'm going to read every single one of the receipts that I have. Oh my God. When the woman can't be stopped. I'm so here for it.
And it is, and it's something, it's rather strange to think about how in Kill Bill, which was a movie produced by like the Weinsteins, as like I believe pretty much all of Tarantino's work has been. She was playing this woman who was pursuing and, killing the men who had done her wrong, but that even as she was working on that film, she herself may have been, in a position of a kind of powerlessness, against the system, that because she refers to Weinstein and his conspirators, which I think is interesting and important, that she's saying that it wasn't like him alone. He had a whole system of people around him who kind of enabled him to do the things that he was doing.
Yeah, and like Merriam-Webster coming out with the word of the year being complicit, right? Like at some point when we do, the excavation work necessary to see how we got here, why we got here, what we do to move forward, we have to really wrestle individually and, collectively with, not just where the blame lies, but ways in which, we all are complicit in, kind of upholding these systems of power that allow people to be exploited and in fact demand that people get exploited. And I love the way you frame that, Carol, because we have this image of Uma Thurman as this filmic badass, right? But she's saying at the same time, that there's this kind of, media persona of me, like kicking ass and taking names. At the same time, I and people like me were subject to, the vagaries of fucking sexual predators, like it right. can affect women. It can affect vulnerable people in any situation,
And also, like, the idea of Weinstein financing a film about a vengeful woman
right.
while himself being such a horrible monster. Also, real quick about the word complicit being word of the year. There was a great tweet that said that, dictionary.com was subtweeting all white people by choosing complicit as word of the year. In more, sort of uplifting and exciting entertainment news, this past week, new posters and a really cool new trailer were revealed for A Wrinkle in Time, Ava DuVernay's upcoming, film adaptation of the beloved children's book.
Excited are you?
Yeah.
I am so excited.
I mean, I'm so excited. It's so great to see this cast of, this young woman of color, a young girl at the center of the story.
Love it.
Yeah.
And it looks really a lot of the sort of whimsical costume design definitely calls back a bit to the Hunger Games and the designs of, I think it's been a while since I read or watched those, but the District or the rich, capitalist class or whatever. But in this, I'm excited that it's characters that are not necessarily all horrible people looking really awesome. And just the casting of like all of these people of color. And I think that Ava DuVernay does some incredible work. I think that her voice in this arena and like getting the fame and notoriety that she's gotten has really been amazing in elevating these stories. Like I've talked before about how Queen Sugar is a show that I just love intensely and I think is so, so important. And of course she's, of course it's one of her shows because she's able to take really complex ideas about race and about gender and about like social environment, social strata, I guess, social culture things. Wow, none of those words made sense, but you get me.
Keep going.
Yeah, I'll just social bananas and social TVs.
I'm really excited. I'm really excited and gratified that you really responded to the costuming in this movie, Anita, because I am going to spend 2018 dressed like Oprah Winfrey as Miss Witch.
I cannot wait.
It's good to know that you're going to back me in that because I am absolutely about to go cosplay. Crazy.
I feel like you deserve a raise if you like cosplayed that every day, right?
Hey. The 3 podcast listeners we have, y'all heard it. You can testify.
No.
If my paycheck doesn't go up from here.
The 3 podcast listeners are the Star Trek Discovery podcast. Are you saying that they're the same listeners or 3 new listeners?
I think it's 3 new listeners, and maybe occasionally a disco person.
I don't know why. I don't know why we give Ebony a microphone.
Because I bring the
all
hot
of our
tea.
Listeners.
I'm not insulting them. In fact, if anything, I'm saying the 3 of you Let me bring it down. Bring the music down. The three of you are so special. You really are the backbone of this podcast and of my life in general. What you bring to me on Twitter, at Ebony Aster, also at Bad Girl Riri, or at Gabrielle Union. I will respond to any of those accounts. You're the ones that keep me inspired. But anyways, back to A Wrinkle in Time. So A Wrinkle in Time, I read the entire series when I was a kid. And I liked A Wrinkle in Time best. One of the things that I've talked about, with people who also had that series as kind of like foundational text as kids, is that as the books go on, the kind of undercurrent of, Christian theology in the books becomes much more overwhelming. And, despite the fact that that's my own faith background, I was just like, yeah, I'm not here for it, But A Wrinkle in Time, I was absolutely, I was blown away by it as a kid. And then, as you get older, you think, I'm not sure if this holds up as much, but the sense of wonder I felt when I read those books is absolutely back now, having watched those trailers. And one of the moments in the trailer that really stood out for me is that moment where the kids are on that street. It's like the suburban, generic beige house street, and all of the children are lined up in the driveways bouncing balls in time, and everyone is kind of perfectly attuned, perfectly in rhythm. And I remember that moment so clearly in the books because one child bounces a ball out of time, and it completely, the sense of fear that person has stepped out of place was bone chilling. And so I love the way that they managed to convey that in the trailer and in the movie. So I'm super excited about it. I'm also excited to see Chris Pine and his gray beard as, scholar dad, whatever. I'm into it.
We will definitely go see that and then talk about it as we do now on our awesome podcast that you're listening to. Thank you for listening. All right, let's dive into it. I'm really stoked that we have an opportunity to talk about Hari Kondabolu's new documentary called The Problem with Apu. If you aren't familiar with him, he's an amazing comedian. He's very funny, and he does a lot of political comedy. He also runs a podcast called Politically Reactive, which I do. I really like that one. So he worked with True TV and made a documentary about Apu from The Simpsons, talking about how this really intensely stereotypical representation of a mockery of an Indian man has been so detrimental and harmful to him personally and all of the other people. So that's the overarching theme of the documentary. I really liked it a lot. I thought that it did such a beautiful job of really validating our work in a way that doesn't happen super often, because you really saw the impact that this character had on a wide range of people.
Right, because, so Hari talks to so many other people who are now themselves entertainers, comedians, writers, actors, or, Daily Show segment hosts, all these really skilled people who when they were younger were, taunted, tormented by being mocked, called Apu, or Apu was referenced in the way that they were mocked. And, and so there's a kind of real psychological and emotional harm that was done to these people. But then you have to think, well, if that's being done to this group of people, then the people doing it to them, obviously their sense of what it means to be Indian or really just brown in America is informed by Apu, because Apu is literally the only, one of them says Apu was the only representation we had for years and years and years. Apu was it. And so it just, the fact that it just really demonstrates how wrong people are when they come at us on Twitter with their arguments games or TV or movies don't actually have any effect whatsoever on anyone's attitudes or opinions or anything. It's of course they do.
Yeah.
They have such a profound...
There's a super powerful moment at the very beginning where it's an old stand-up of Hari, and someone heckles him from the audience with like phrases
Thank
from
you, come again.
Yeah, and like having that on camera and like opening with that, I thought was really powerful.
And Hari's response, like, to the heckler is so good. He says, you're the reason I do comedy, sir. Like, basically as if, like, he's there to kind of try to shatter those kinds of stereotypes. Yeah. But he realizes that is a legitimate issue that needs to be challenged and disrupted.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I think one of the things I loved about, and I loved so many things about this documentary, but one of the things I loved about it is the way that Hari speaks to, these different creators, artists, producers, comics, thinkers, scientists, etc. And the ways in which this like kind of multi-generational, across the gender spectrum, group of people are saying, yes, it's affected me in this way. And in my life, without me wanting to or even intending to, I'm always having to respond to that with my actions and my art first, because that's what people know, like their ideas about what constitutes Southeast Asian identity, what constitutes an Indian person is always already informed by this incredibly noxious, incredibly pervasive representation. And yeah, there's room for, transgression in comedy, although we can definitely talk about, the idea, the way that people take refuge in the notion that like The Simpsons, is an equal opportunity offender. What the fuck ever, missed me with that. But I think, when you have such a like dearth of representation, when you can literally count on one hand with 4 fingers down the number of representations of Southeast Asians, in pop culture, then we just simply don't have the luxury of letting these kinds of stereotypical and racist depictions to continue. And so that's why I was so furious when Hari, has that sit down conversation with Dana Gould, who was a writer and executive producer on The Simpsons for many years. And his rationale and defense for the presentation of Apu essentially comes down to 2 things. 1, white people find accents funny. And 2, this is what you have to do when you're racing to complete 20 plus scripts, a year over the course of, 3 decades. Man, if you don't get to fuck with that, like that's the laziest ass entitled bullshit reason. I can't believe I'm this angry at 8 in the morning, but just, that section, I'm surprised Hari didn't jump across the couch and just like, throw a sock in Dana Gould's mouth. I was so pissed.
Yeah. What was so illuminating about that was that the way that Dana Gould said, exploiting the, Apu in these kind of 4 ways that people find funny to the writers is exactly the same as exploiting, Mr. Burns in these 4 ways.
Right.
It's like no different. And Hari points out Burns is like a powerful, billionaire figure. So when you mock him, and those people actually exist, bad, evil, so when you mock him, you're punching up. When you mock Apu, you're not. And the way that Dana Gould says it's exactly the same to us in the writer's room. It just, like, I cannot imagine that there are people of Indian descent in that writer's room. It's got to be, like, just a sea of, like, white people, because if you have a diverse group in the writer's room, they will fucking know that it isn't exactly the same, and they will be able to make...
Although I will say, like, knowing people who are people of color and women in writers' rooms who might be the only one, they, don't necessarily have the power or ability to change that stuff, even though they know it's a problem. Which is why you need to have so much more... You need to have so many more people of color and women in these spaces.
Yeah, exactly.
And queer folks.
And there's also the complication, and Hari goes into this too when talking to some of the actors in the show about how sometimes these representations, as stereotypical and one-dimensional as they are, become so overwhelming that the people who actually inhabit that identity start to take them on, not the, you know what I'm saying? Like they, as a way, almost as a defense, like a psychic defense, they will say like, oh no, I found it funny because it's just so overwhelming. It's just so everywhere. You start to, buy into the cultural myths around it, despite knowing how, ultimately traumatizing it is to say like, this is what people think about me. And it was, when Hari says like, what gets me about Apu is that it's a white guy doing an impression of a white guy making fun of my dad, you know? So yeah, like it affects him personally, you know, but also like you can hear, you know, the kind of sadness when he thinks like, this is what people think of people like me and like my family. And so I loved when he talked to his parents too. And, you know, his mom says, yeah, like, you know, it's not great. We don't love it, but you have the luxury in the generation you're in of being able to question these things as an American in a way that maybe we didn't feel as if we had the luxury to question.
Yeah, which was super, like, listening to that, you know, like, I feel that as, like, a child of immigrants, as a child of immigrant parents who were just like, you come to this country to provide a better life for your family. It's the American dream, sort of like meritocracy, bootstraps bullshit that I don't really agree with. But why would you challenge this space that's a better space for my family, right? And now those of us who have grown up here and this is our cultural identity, we're like, yeah, no. Like, that's not okay, and this isn't okay, and we have more space to fight for that, I think, than what our parents felt like they had the capacity to do. One thing that I found, so the Dana Gould stuff really dominated my notes when I was watching this, because I thought that was one of the most... it was just watching him say these things and being like, do you know what you're being interviewed for? Like, why did you agree to this?
Okay.
So one of the things that I was thinking about, because I'm so glad they got that interview, it added a depth to this conversation that otherwise wouldn't have been there, is in his quotes about justifying this horribly harmful stereotypical representation, he kept using the word nature. So he would say things like, accents, by their very nature to white Americans, are funny, period. And then he would say that, like, you know, as Carolyn mentioned earlier, that there's no difference between making fun of Burns and Apu. Like, he has no conception of power analysis at all, and that it's the nature of writing a television show. It's the nature of comedy. And I think that that's really important to understand his worldview there, because one of the things that privilege does is it makes you invisible to, one, your privilege, and two, you think that the world is, that as you perceive it, is just the way that it is. And, like, I'm really troubled by the language of, like, it is just inherent in us and it is just the nature of us to, like, be deeply offensive. Like, no, this is not the way it has to be, and it's not the way it always is going to be.
Right. And the idea when he asked Hari, like, well, what would you have us do? Would you have us, like, get rid of this beloved character?
Yes!
As if Apu is enshrined in the Smithsonian or something. As if it will be, like, you know, robbery up on a grand cosmic scale, and he was like, to delete this kind of figure from the show.
Yeah, and he was like, oh, what, would you have us kill him? And I'm like, oh, there's no other options here? Like, of course we don't want you to kill him off. That would be terrible. But, like, there are many ways to write a character off a show or to change a character. Like, it's just such narrow-minded thinking, and I think that was really, really important to see in this documentary. One of the other things that stuck out at me was there's a comedian that's interviewed named Russell Peters, and I'm not familiar with his comedy, but based on the documentary, he talks about, like, he does a lot of accents. Like, that's kind of his comedic shtick, I guess. And there was a quote that he said, because people would be like, well, why can you do that? And, like, you know, sort of getting, challenging him on his career. And he said, don't get caught up on my color and don't get caught up on the words, get caught up on the intent. And I was like, no. I was like, I really don't agree with that.
Me neither. I mean, that's another argument that people will throw at us fairly often of when we criticize some character or some thing as like having the cultural impact of being sexist. People might say, oh, but don't you think that the creators wanted it to be like this, somehow this, like, positive thing? And it doesn't matter what their intent was, because we don't walk out of the theater or walk away from the TV show or walk away from the game impacted by the creative intent. We walk away impacted by what the media actually does and what it actually, says.
And look, I've spent the last 5 years talking to game developers, like, a lot directly. And, like, there's definitely intentional sexism in the games industry, 100%. But a large portion of it is just not knowing. Like, it's so, that's, again, like I was saying with privilege, is that you're invisible to it. You have to, like, learn that it exists in your life. And so a lot of times there's just like, oh, well, of course we would make this woman, like, big boobs and, like, you know, battle lingerie and all this stuff, because that's just the way it's been. It was quote unquote the nature of whatever, right?
Right.
And so I think that, like, completely throws a wrench in the argument of what is my intent, because if what you produce, you didn't intend it to be sexist, but it sure as shit was, that's going to have harmful ramifications.
Yeah, and, you know, we do, you know, we have, as consumers, you know, of media, like, we do have a complicated relationship to some media based upon who we know the creators to be. So if, you know, there's, like, if there's a comic who's a person of color, you know, making some kind of joke that's directed towards Black people, for instance, if that comic is a Black person, I'm much more willing to accept it than if it's, you know, a white comic, for instance. So yeah, you know, sometimes the identity of the creator goes into it, but there's something much more nuanced about the way they negotiate that comedy versus the kind of superficial, one-dimensional way in which, you know, people from a position of privilege negotiate that kind of comedy. But also in terms of intent, man, it's just whatever. Okay, if I'm baking a cake and I use salt instead of sugar, you don't have to eat the cake just because I intended to make a cake. It doesn't make the cake any more edible because I intended to bake something good.
God.
The final product is still bullshit.
Yeah, so next time you bring a cake into the office, I'll be like, yo, fuck your intent.
Carolyn, you taste this first.
Yeah. For the record, Ebony,
I'm not bringing you cakes. For the record, and I'm not bringing you cinnamon buns. I'm not bringing nothing.
Ebony has never brought cakes into the office, ever, not once. So maybe hashtag Ebony bring cakes should be a thing that exists.
Yeah, dream on, Dreamweaver.
All right, let's dive into Stranger Things 2, shall we?
Yeah. So I was a huge fan of season 1 of Stranger Things. And you know what? Like, even though I would say that season 2 is a huge step down in, like, overall quality and cohesiveness in everything, I still really enjoyed watching it because I was there still for the core cast had some great moments. I'm still such a sucker for, like, the synthwave John Carpenter soundtrack.
Oh my god,
like
the sound design is incredible. Like, just I blow my mind.
Yeah,
well, except for that Ted Nugent addition to the soundtrack, that was unnecessary and unwelcome.
And all that, like, 80s paraphernalia, the Ghostbusters Halloween costumes, the Dragon's Lair arcade game. Like, I'm just, you know, this is my childhood iconography. So I feel like, oh, I know who these kids are. I know this time. It's that Spielbergian childhood E.T., you know, time period. And so I still really liked it. Or it worked on me. But I guess I have a few issues with it that I think make it less successful than the first season. You know, and one is that the first season already had enough on its plate, like trying to tell a story about kind of the core cast members who are all still already here. This season brings in a really fascinating new character named Max and her, like, stepbrother Billy and Eleven's sort of lost sister, another girl who has, or now a woman, but who has kind of mysterious powers, named Kali. And I feel like all these characters, they get short shrift, right? I wanted more of Max. I wanted more of these characters, but because it's so busy trying to tell a story about the characters we already know, I just feel like these characters seem kind of tacked on. They don't feel really, like, developed in the way that I wanted them to be.
Yeah, and I feel like some of it, for Max and Billy, I feel like it was, like, I don't know, maybe they were, because you don't find out until very late in the series who they are and, like, the backstory. And so
right.
in going with the sort of, like, horror genre that this plays on, I feel like it was a bit of, like, trying to keep the mystery alive. And I think that the negotiation between, like, who are these characters? What are their interests? What is this relationship between this dude and this girl that he's being really abusive towards? But then it took too long. right? Like it took a little too
yeah.
long so that you like, so you're feeling this way because you're like, well, the show's done and now I get it, but I'm still not really that invested.
Yeah. Yeah, and when you do learn more about Billy, like I found the revelations about him really compelling, right? Really interesting, and now I want him to have a kind of journey that he goes on, like emotionally, psychologically, because I feel like it says something about how abuse perpetuates itself from generation to generation very often because people don't have other models for behavior, or they don't have models for healthy behavior.
Damn it, now I can't crack on Billy because you've just given us a really thoughtful comment about his character when all I thought about him when I saw him on screen was, why is that 40-year-old acting like he's in high school? I loved it because it was just like the 1980s when you would have people who were 10 smooth years from retirement playing high school freshmen, and I thought that was genius. But I couldn't look at him and take any of that seriously. You and Anita both had such like thoughtful encounters with this second season, and I really didn't, and I was disappointed in my reaction. I definitely will go back and finish it. I'm only, I think, 6 episodes through the series, but I wasn't driven to finish it, to binge it in the way that I was in the first season, partly because I loved this image we get of like the inner life of children and the rich, like imaginative landscapes they inhabit when you're in that special period when you're like 10, 11 years old and you can do things, outside the house by yourself without your parents right up on you, but you're still like young and dumb enough to not really get how the adult world works. Like I loved that in Stranger Things, season 1. And so as the children get older, like I just personally, not through any fault of the show, but just personally, I'm less invested in it. And like you, there were so many different like narrative threads and introduction of new characters in this second season that I felt a little lost. I mean, obviously, like I'm on board for Erica, Lucas's little sister. If anyone gets a spinoff or gets more screen time in season 3, she absolutely needs to be on screen.
Yeah, I totally thought of you. But I was like, Ebony, is this what you were like as a kid? Because
I wish I was like that as a kid. I wanted to be like that as a kid, but I was not that cool. But one of the other funny things about this second season was... Spoiler alert. Spoiler alert. Francis stole Pee-wee's bike. We find out where 11 has been since the end of the first season, right? Like, we had that sense that she was going to be with Hopper because the last image of season 1 is him leaving those Eggo waffles for her in that, like, hideout. But so she's been living with Hopper in this murder cabin out in the woods, for a year. And, like, Hopper doesn't let her leave the house. Like, for her own safety, he's being kind of like way overprotective. Although given what she's been through, what they've all been through, you could make an argument that it's not overprotective at all, but he certainly doesn't communicate well to her, like exactly why it's so necessary for her to remain like inside, isolated from her friends, etc. But because I'm a woman who has no children of her own, I know that I should have empathized with Elle, but I got so irritated when she would crack off against Hopper. And I'm like, girl, he could have left your ass in the woods eating raw squirrel meat and wearing leaves for clothes. You better act like you got some gratitude.
See, I was the exact opposite. And I think, in a weird way...
That's because you're a nice person, Caro.
No. If I'm going to get a little... No. I'm being serious here. I think it's because I feel similarly like I missed out on a lot when I was young, right? So when her friends are out, like, having all this fun, and she's, like, trapped in this cabin, and so sometimes she even lashes out in anger, right? She she sees Mike and Max together, and she lashes out at Max using her magic abilities. And while I'm like, on one hand, I'm super frustrated, like that the show is positioning already these girls as being in competition with each other. Like, I think that sucks, and I wish that they could just all be like friends without kind of this need to like, pair off or like, oh, there's the girls and the boys are like, kind of different from each other now. I guess I also really understood Eleven's like intense desire to get out of that cabin and just exist in the world for a bit.
Yeah, my dream is to be in the middle of nowhere and never go outside and have someone bring me candy.
Right.
So I was like, what's the problem?
You'd have it covered. Yeah. But, so Hopper is like super, super protective, and he doesn't, and we all understand the reasons why he's that way, but he also doesn't really communicate them in a way that's like sensitive or compassionate. And of course, it's super obvious as it's happening that it's setting up dramatic conflict, right? We know that it's going to be a thing where it just like that's the conflict between them, is that Hopper's been such an asshole and it hasn't understood Eleven's desire, and Eleven maybe has been kind of an asshole back. But I saw this tweet from Soha, who works at Riot. She saw an image on Tumblr that somebody had created where it was like 3 very similar images. It was Joel and Ellie from The Last of Us, like riding in a truck. It was Logan and Laura from the movie Logan riding in like a car or a truck. And it was Hopper and Eleven riding in Hopper's truck in Stranger Things Season 2. And the text of her tweet said something like, I saw this on my Tumblr dashboard, and I know it's supposed to be heartfelt, but all I can think is, why do we keep telling the same stories over and over again? And I hadn't thought about that before, but it really made me think about what is this pattern of men who are like emotionally closed off and really kind of gruff, and in many cases violent, and in many cases people having suffered tremendous loss themselves. Joel lost a daughter and Hopper lost a daughter, who then are like, can only kind of maybe be humanized, or in some ways, their emotions can only be accessed, their humanity can only be accessed through like a connection with a girl, or I just think that's it says something about the way we think about men and women, that men's humanity, it's almost like men, and I've read this in texts about like patriarchy and sexism. I think I read it in The Gender Knot. There's this notion that that women possess. The women are like the vessels of humanity, and that men kind of need women to access humanity. Like that's a patriarchal idea about what it is to be a man, right?
Yeah, totally. Right, and that, part of being a good dad or being a good man is having the capacity for that violence and being willing to use it, in protection of your family, whether it's biological or self-created. So you have bad dads like Matthew Modine's character, who's actually called Papa, right?
Oh,
in the
Papa,
first season,
yeah.
But then you have, he's juxtaposed against people like Hopper, and people like Bob in season 2. These men. Yeah, I know, right? Samwise. But these men, who present kind of different models of masculinity, and who offer a certain something. But when it comes to actually being able to protect children, like having the capacity to physically dominate, to be able to engage in violence if necessary, is part and parcel of what makes one a good dad. And I think it's probably like the murder dad phenomenon is probably linked to like the action dad or action grandpa phenomenon, right? Like Liam Neeson in Taken. Like for a while there, like we were getting some really like, just badass grandpas in these action movies coming for people who were, trying to take out their families.
Yeah, totally. So one last thing I want to just say about season 2 is I I was excited when, like, there was an opening shot of the first episode where you saw, like, a bunch of people of color and, like, punks and just, like, kind of outcast weirdos being chased down by cops. And you're like, who are they? I'm glad they're responding to the fact that, you know, there's, like, one person of color on this show for the most part. Like, maybe they're going to bring in new characters and what have you. And this is a thing that I've seen in shows generally where it's like the cast is entirely white and the supporting cast is white. And then they get a bunch of criticism and you'll see some changes in that. So for example, like The Leftovers, I feel like there was a concerted change from the first season to the second season in introducing a black family into that universe. So I was excited about it. And then I completely forgot about them because, like, episode 2, episode 3, episode 4, nothing. We don't see these people. And I totally blanked on the fact that they existed. So when they showed up again, I was like, oh, right. And at that point, I'm like, whatever. You've already gone through the entire goddamn show. Also, that particular episode was the worst episode. And I thought it was really, I thought it was really disappointing because I think I can do this without spoilers. I think so. I understand why. Like, I understand the narrative threads that needed to happen. I understand the development of 11 that needed to happen in this space. But those characters were so fucking dumb. Like, just as someone who like was very much a part of like outcast crews that looked like that was not. It was just so over the top, and it was so like. I don't know if flamboyant's the right word, but it felt really silly. And the fact that they were trying, like, their motivations and the things that they were doing, it just did not work for me. And it sucked because I was so happy when Elle met her sister. And, like, there was that emotional connection, and then she was being manipulated. So you have these sort of weirdos and these people of color who are now kind of the bad people. They're kind of the antagonists. They're doing the wrong things, quote unquote.
Right. And my feeling is that they were being developed really. I don't think we've seen the last of them. Like, I really feel like they were created almost to become like antagonists later on. Or I feel like Elle and Kali, her sister, may have some because Kali's still out there, right? She's still doing her thing, presumably, and I don't think the show is going to just leave that hanging. So I feel like we're going to see more of her and.
Yeah.
You know.
Okay, very, very last thought about Stranger Things 2. And 1. The whole universe of Stranger Things. As a child who frequently had nosebleeds, like, some were so severe that I had to go to the emergency room, right? I was that kid.
Why were you doing so much cocaine as a child?
I know, man. What were my parents thinking? Why does Elle not carry around Kleenexes? Why? Just wipe your goddamn fucking nose.
Because it wouldn't look as cool if she's, like, wiping her nose with Kleenex after she's done some badass thing. She's summoned the power.
Be like the rest of us and use your goddamn sleeve. All right? Just, like, wipe that shit with your sleeve.
That could be dramatic. That could be cool. Yeah.
And then it would smear across her conversation. It would smear across her face, and then it would have the same feeling that you want. But, like, that dripping down your nose face is not comfortable. You don't get used to that. Well, you might, but I'm going to pretend, because I want to rant about this, that you don't get used to that. All right, we are going to move on to our next section, which I hate the name of, and I'm going to say this every week until we come up with a new name or I get bored of doing it. Hey, Ebony.
Hey, Anita.
What's your deal this week?
I'm glad you asked.
I'm sure you are.
My deal this week is, 1, I need to ask you for some time off in spring 2018 because Prince Harry and Meghan Markle just announced their engagement. And I'm going to need to get my church hat ready because I'm going to bust into that wedding. The way that the engagement news kind of lit up social media yesterday, and, you know, to a person, everyone I follow on Black Twitter was like, I could not care less about the British royal family, but now that we have a black princess who's about to, you know, two-step into Buckingham Palace, I'm on board. So, Anita, if you could just go ahead and sign the paper giving me that day off.
I heard
that would be fantastic.
I saw a tweet about how she's like a professional professional calligraphy or something? Was that
yes,
a joke?
I believe you got that information from Ashley, one of our team members.
Oh, that's right.
Who's been doing the deep investigative work that is her byword. Yeah. So apparently she was a freelance calligrapher at some point. I don't know. But what I can tell you is, A, she's 3 years older than Harry. She's 36. B, she's divorced. C, she's biracial. D, she was on a not even fair to middling, but below that level USA show called Suits. Like, I just love Prince Harry.
Wait, she was on Suits?
Anita, oh my goodness gracious. We need to do more prep.
I'm on the other side of the world. I'm not paying attention to anything.
Yeah, so she was on Suits. And I'm just telling you, I feel like Prince Harry was like, oh, you want to be mad about something? I'm going to give you 57 reasons to be mad about this woman that I proposed
now
to.
I got to look this shit up because I totally watched Suits, which I don't recommend to anybody.
Apparently she played a paralegal on the show. I don't know a single person.
Oh my God, wait, what?
Under the age of 60 who has ever seen an episode of that show.
Was she like a recurring character?
Yeah.
Oh my God, I know who she is.
Well, good work catching up, Anita.
All right, that's exciting. Also, fun fact, Ashley, who is our fourth in the Feminist Frequency family, you will meet her next week. So
yeah,
she'll be on the podcast.
I'm very excited.
Yeah, she's not as obnoxious as us at all. So, okay, Carolyn, what's your deal this week?
So, in the past week, at some point, International Men's Day occurred. And,
I'm sorry, I can't hear that without wanting to lose my mind.
It's a kind of sad in my opinion that International Men's Day, in my experience anyway, is an excuse for, well, yes, but also that for sure. But also it's like, why don't we have White History Month? Because it's fucking every month is White History Month. What was I saying? International Men's Day. Like, to me, it seems like just an excuse for men on Twitter, certain men, to rail against feminism, even more, maybe a little more than they usually do. Whereas I really wish that it could be this occasion for highlighting and the ways in which patriarchy is harmful to men too.
Yeah.
But anyway, for whatever reason, like the fact that it was International Men's Day made me think again about the representations of masculinity in the Justice League, which we talked about last week. And I started going, oh, you know what? They really are fucked up. Because I spoke last week about the scene where Aquaman starts pouring out his emotions. He's being very sincere, very genuine. He's like really expressing himself in a way that's very uncharacteristic of him. And then, of course, the revelation, the joke is that Wonder Woman had the lasso of truth around him, and that's why he was doing it, because he would never, ever, ever in a million years actually do that, normally. And it's like the whole joke is that, of course, he's not that kind of sensitive, emotionally expressive guy. Like, that would be weird. And how messed up that is. And then there's also the joke, there's a moment between Superman and Batman where Superman says, to Batman, I know you didn't bring me back because you like me. And Batman's response, Bruce's response is, well, I don't not like you, and it's like this weird thing. And that got a huge laugh in my theater, right? Because it's like, of course, these men cannot actually just express themselves to each other. And the other, go ahead.
No, go.
Well, the other thing too is going back to the Stranger Things thing of the men who were really closed off. What is like the big gun, the big weapon, quote unquote, that Batman uses to get at Superman's humanity? It's Lois Lane. It's a woman, right? It's another example of men whose humanity is like closed off, and can be only accessed or they can only be imbued with it through close contact.
What do you got against love,
woman.
Carol? God, you're just like anti-love.
I love love.
For the record, I am so excited that we have a podcast and this shit is recorded, because I'm going to give you a big fat I fucking told you so, because last week I said that scene was bullshit, and I'm so validated, and I'm putting my hands in the air right now, and you can't see that. Yeah.
Anita's writing it in her little notebook. Times I owned the crew. One.
Which literally never happened. So I'm gonna just take this as not humbly as I possibly can.
You know what? Speaking about Justice League, I would love if someone talked a little bit more about Cyborg. So I don't know the DC universe as well as I should, and so I'm not gonna. Contrary to expectations, I'm not going to advance some half-baked theory, but I was really struck by the kind of augmented masculinity in Justice League. So you have a character like Aquaman, for instance, right, who is powerful in and of himself, right? Like his power resides in himself. Yeah. Versus a character like Batman, right, whose power, if anything, is being a rich white dude, but who has to
which he
clothe,
admits.
Like has to clothe himself in armor and needs tools to conduct the work that he does. And then you have a figure like Cyborg, which is something different. You know, it's another version of augmented masculinity, but it's an elimination of the body. I mean, Cyborg in many ways is more machine than man, and I think it's a very interesting thing. It's a very interesting direction for that kind of character, given that it's a black man. Like his origin was as a black man, right? So like the destruction of his black male body and the creation of this new form of masculinity and what is it, you know, capable of doing? What is it not capable of doing? You know, how does it work for him? How does it not work for him? Whatever. Like I would be interested to read more about the character of Cyborg. So if anyone out there can direct me to
send us links to that,
some interesting reading, that would be awesome. I would love to read that.
Yeah.
And super quick, because I'm worried people are going to say, well, what about the Flash? He's like an alternative, like, representation of masculinity. And, like, he is, but not, like, a great one, in my opinion. Like, he's so, you know, we see his like, lair, his little superhero lair. And, you know, he's got, like, a video of Asian girls dancing. And, I mean, he doesn't seem like somebody with... He's so socially awkward, and he doesn't seem like somebody with a healthy ability to, like, engage with other people either, right?
I feel like an interesting topic for another episode or a bonus thing would be, because I'm really fascinated by, like, the sort of beta male trope and how, like, if you are beta... quote unquote, then you get to be really misogynist and shitty, and that's okay.
Yeah.
And I see that a lot. So, you know, maybe we'll talk about that in the future.
Absolutely.
My deal this week is actually another podcast. So you may have heard that Charles Manson died like a week or two ago. Hooray! Whatever.
Hooray!
He was shitty, but he lived too long anyways, so whatever. Not to minimize how horribly that sounded, so dismissive. Sorry. Okay. Anyways, my point being is that there is this podcast called You Must Remember This, and it is a storytelling podcast, or it's described as a storytelling podcast about the secret and or forgotten histories of Hollywood's first century by Karina Longworth. And it's really, really interesting, you know, as someone who is fascinated by Hollywood and film and the, you know, like getting into the cultural context of how film, you know, the films that you remember and the cultures around all of that and how certain directors got their start and all that sort of stuff. So I actually haven't listened to much of this podcast at all. It's just been recommended to me. So on this trip, I decided Charles Manson just died, and they have a 5-part series about Charles Manson and Hollywood. I've listened to the first 2 episodes, and I find it really fascinating because it is a take on serial killers and like cult leaders that is intrinsically tied to Hollywood, right? That he was in and engaging with and like hanging out with Hollywood folks. Like he was literally giving women to Hollywood, like musicians and actors and stuff like that. Like it was really it was really, it's so fascinating. And I think one of the things that I found really interesting is that she talks about the culture of Hollywood at the time and how Hollywood was going through an identity crisis. In terms of the films were still very, very old school conservative, but the culture with the sexual revolution and all of these things happening just couldn't keep up. And so Hollywood was desperate for something new, right? For how to tap into that audience. And so Charles Manson enters this scene at this particular time. The second episode is about his relationship with Dennis Wilson of the Beach Boys, which I didn't know that much about any of this stuff, and it's really, really good. I think she's a beautiful storyteller, and I highly recommend this series if you're interested in that kind of stuff. Yeah, well, so that's our show. You can catch us back here every single Wednesday forever. And once again...
I never asked for this.
And I never signed a contract to that effect.
How do you know? You might have. I might have, weaseled it in there when you got hired.
You know what? You didn't ask me if I watched Buffy when I got hired. So who really did the trickery?
So... once again, a big, big, big thank you to all of our Drip backers. Drip is Kickstarter's brand new subscription-based crowdfunding platform. We are listener-supported. Everything Feminist Frequency does is listener-supported, or viewer-supported, whatever. Your money helps us keep doing our work. Sometimes they're watching, and sometimes they're reading. So, in terms of this podcast, every dollar you contribute to our Drip goes directly to producing this particular podcast, Feminist Frequency Radio. So by pitching in, you are joining this growing Feminist Frequency community. We've got some great rewards for you, so head on over to d.rip/femfreak and join us. Also, if you like this show, we have a small favor to ask. Wherever you are listening to this, whether it's Apple Podcasts or Stitcher or Google Play, please leave us a review. It really helps spread the word about the show. And also tell your friends so they can listen too. You can check out all of our work and our other podcasts at feministfrequency.com, and you can find each of us on Twitter. I am at Anita Sarkeesian.
I'm at Carolyn Michelle.
I am at Maxine Waters.
Aw, don't send, whatever. Ebony's at Ebony Astor, etc., etc. Our producer is Phil Circus, who also computes.
Wow,
oh my God.
On the last take that you all didn't hear, I did the same thing. All right, start again. Our producer is Phil Circus. He also composed our amazing theme music.
Oh yeah, that sounds totally natural, Anita.
Well, I got it out, so here we are. All right, y'all. We will see you all next week, and hopefully people can talk like not robots. Bye.
Bye.
Later.